life.
When I sing to the river, the river sings back to me.
Find the fire.
I can hear the voices calling.
Take things into your own hands to take
From the time when time began. I can feel its cooling water, turning rocks to grains of sand. Long ago spirits are asking, what of my story do you know?
Welcome back to our second episode of We, They, and the People, the character of King. My name is Jonathan Pitts-Wiley. I'm the artistic director here at Mixed Magic Theater, and I'm just so thrilled to be having this conversation about not just the life and legacy of the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King, but his words and what it means to bring some of those words to life on stage. So with me is Mixed Magic Theater co-founder Ricardo Pitts-Wiley, also my dad. And so welcome back, Dad, to the theater that you created.
Some of my best work.
So, oh, well, geez. Oh, take that, Rick. No, I love you, Rick. So let's just really jump into it. We're gonna break this down into talking really about three shows that we have done. And the first we're going to talk about is Letter from Birmingham City Jail. The second we'll talk about is Beyond Vietnam. And the third is actually sort of the show that is kind of the focal point of our, what you might call civil rights plays in Fate Comes Knocking. But first, let's talk about Letter from Birmingham City Jail. One of the questions that, I've had people raise to me, sort of in the last few years when we've been doing it is like, why Letter from Birmingham City Jail? What about this King do we sort of want audiences and really the larger public to know about?
Well, there's a couple of things. Letter from Birmingham City Jail is beautiful literature. It's just beautiful literature on one level. But there's also, when studying King, there's an academic way of studying King, and then there's a dramatic way of studying King. So when we started looking at the letter, not only for its historic content, but also what were the clues that King was giving you about what he was thinking, what he was feeling? We often are challenged to take scholarship and say, okay, how do we make it accessible? How do we make it interesting? How do we lift it off the page and put it in there, put a charge into it and electrify it in some way? Well, with King's works, he was such a dramatic speaker that sometimes you could almost forget what a great writer he was, and how thoughtful, how deep and thoughtful he was about certain things, and trying to bring Letter from Birmingham City Jail to life. There was always the question of what was he thinking in this moment when he was writing this?
Sure.
Knowing that he was in jail. He had to smuggle it out. He wrote on the margins of newsprint and things like that. Sure. So he had to be economical with words.
Sure.
But also, as you look at the work, you can, when you start performing the work, and we performed it in multiple ways. We've done it, me as a solo performer, with 3 young actors who were great.
Yeah, sure.
With as many as 5 and 6 actors, where each of them were responsible to take on a certain section of it.
Sure.
And what you try to do is, if you're doing multiple actors, you say, what is the through line for this group of actors? Or this actor, what is the through line for this actor? And so on. Because then you start to see how well constructed the letter is, because it kept giving you all these characters.
It keeps giving you opportunities. And for those who are not familiar with Letter from Birmingham City Jail and haven't done the, let me Google this right now, This letter was written in April of 1963. Now, King had been jailed in Birmingham for organizing and sort of obviously trying to fight against Jim Crow segregation and things of that nature. And so he gets arrested, and while he is sort of imprisoned, you have sort of the white clergy, Judeo-Christian clergy, kind of write this open letter in the newspaper that effectively is like, hey, we kind of get like what you're trying to do, but we don't need outside agitators coming in and stirring situations up in Birmingham. We have our own black community here, and we're working to make sure that things are put together, and we're going to get on track with some of your requests.
Yeah.
And King took exception to this.
He took umbrage with it, but also one of the interesting things is he had a context to write from. He was able to take their argument and say, okay, I'm going to deal with each one of your statements one at a time. You say this is my response. You say this is my response. So he had kind of a roadmap to respond to. But along the road, as he was writing, you could almost feel, as he was writing, how he had to govern his anger.
Sure.
How he had to go back and say, well, maybe I can say this better. How many times he makes historical references or literature references, philosophical references, biblical references. He was able to support his arguments over and over and over again with facts and literary examples.
Sure.
Which, because very often there was his voice, he was clearly speaking from his point of view, but then there was the voice of the philosophers, the prophets, the historians, and that's why it became so interesting to dramatize, because you're trying to find not only his voice, but their voice, and also trying to capture what he was feeling. I mean, the cadence sometimes, it's almost like reading August Wilson sometimes. August Wilson gives actors a chance to build a cadence towards something. Well, King's oratory style was very clear in the letter also. But as he built his argument, and he used a black ministerial technique of the reoccurring theme.
Sure.
You want us to wait, and then he'll say something else. You still say we should wait or we should stop. So he was building this rhythm that, as you start to work on the work, you start to understand more and more his heartbeat, not just his head.
Let me ask you this. So you talk about the sort of the canvas that you have to kind of work with due to the language. Now, talking to you as a master of your craft, as an actor, and as a black man of a certain age, what, and certainly somebody not trying to do a Martin Luther King impression,
right?
Where did you find sort of the challenges as an actor in that way? And then I'm also going to ask the question of, and when you were directing these younger performers, where did you find either like, wow, this is different and interesting, or like sort of you've mined new material and just seeing it done in a different way? So it's kind of a two-part question: what it's like to perform it from your position, and what it's like to direct it for performers who are sort of coming up.
Well, as a performer, one of the things that I'm adamant about not trying to do is do impersonations. Something I learned from Adrian Hall at Trinity was just tell the audience who you are, and they'll either accept it or reject it based on how you present it. So it's not about trying to impersonate King. It's about trying to embody his work, his life and energy, and with your own presence. So I never felt like I had to do, I had to make people believe that I was Martin Luther King. I just had to say I'm doing his work, and I'm in the same situation he was in, and trying to bring it to life. When you're directing people, especially young people, you have to balance your own living experience with their living reality. You have to find a way to say what you're thinking, feeling right now is as relevant as it was in 1963, because I found myself dealing with really 3 generations of people who have experience with King. My parents' generation, my own generation, and then this younger generation that you can't make that younger generation feel the way about King the way you feel. All you can do is say, what value do you add to what he said already? What's your living experience? You can't invalidate that. So there were times when, particularly when you're working with multiple cast people, whose mouth do you put certain words in? Yeah. Sometimes a female voice is the voice you need to hear. In fact, the more volatile parts of the letter, I had a tendency to give to the women. Right. Because they brought a certain kind of energy and rage to it that wasn't macho. And it was.
Well, it's righteous.
It was totally righteous.
And it's not so much about like, here's women being hysterical. No, it's like rooted in righteous indignation, and it does hit differently, sort of in different voices. We're gonna take a quick break right now at this moment, then we're gonna come back with our second segment for We, They, and the People, the character of King. Greetings and felicitations, everyone. This is Jonathan Pitts-Wiley, artistic director here at Mixed Magic Theater in beautiful Pawtucket, Rhode Island. And my buddy here, Polly, wanted me to tell you that you need to subscribe to the Mixed Magic Theater YouTube channel. You get a lot of great original content, and we think it's good, enjoyable stuff to be looking at. You can look at it on your phone. You can look at it on an iPad. You could look at it on a TV. You could look at it on a desktop. So the thing that you should do is go to the Mixed Magic Theater page and subscribe and like, and make sure the notifications are set. So you can just be like, ding, 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 ding. Oh my goodness, Mixed Magic dropped another video. And then Polly will be just sitting in the back talking about, yeah. Subscribe today, and thank you as always for believing in magic. Welcome back to We, They, and the People, the character of King. We just wrapped up talking about Letter from Birmingham City Jail, and now we're gonna move into talking about a show that you and I, Pops, have done together in Beyond Vietnam. Now that's April 4th, 1967, at Riverside Church, the historic Riverside Church in New York. And this is a year to the day before King would be assassinated, which of course was April 4th of 1968 at the Lorraine Motel in Memphis, Tennessee. And this is an interesting part of the show because we gotta talk about it together. So I guess I'm asking you a generational question on a certain level. How did Beyond Vietnam sort of strike you, particularly sort of either juxtaposed against something like Letter from Birmingham City Jail or the work that we never do, which is the I Have a Dream speech and things of that nature?
Well, the thing about Beyond Vietnam is there's a historical context in which King presents the work, which cannot be ignored. One, there are many who say he was late to the party, opposing coming out against the war in Vietnam.
Sure.
That he was trying to balance his relationship with LBJ and get civil rights legislation passed. And part of the condition was we'll get the Voting Rights Act passed, we'll get some other things passed, but you can't come out against the war. Well, when other leaders, most notably Muhammad Ali, were coming out strongly against the war. So when he decided to make that statement, part of when we presented it, there's a figure of King that I played who was actually writing the speech that he was going to give. And the weight of knowing that what he was about to do was going to change the course of history.
Sure.
And impact his life in ways that we would only find out a year later.
Sure.
But one of the things he does in Beyond Vietnam is he's such a historian. He says, okay, I'm going to show you what happened. This is what happened first. The French were in Vietnam. They got kicked out. The English were in Vietnam. They got kicked out. Ho Chi Minh went to the world audience and said, we don't want your help, arms and things like that. We just want you to acknowledge our righteous struggle for independence.
True.
And so when he started to lay it out, it became an indictment of colonialism, of imperialism, of American invasion.
Well, I mean, this is, if I can jump in here, what you're also talking about is like, so much against the, the backdrop of the Cold War in sort of the tilting at windmills that was done for the better part, of 50 years. And, because, you talk about Ho Chi Minh, he references the American Declaration of Independence.
That's right.
But it was in October of 45 that Harry S. Truman starts sending money to the French,
yes.
Right? Because he would rather prop up a Western European colonial power because it's like, well, I need you to be secure because we're worried about the Russians and what they will or won't do. And so what I find to be so fascinating, there's just so many layers to this show, but something that I find particularly interesting and why I love to do this is probably my favorite sort of King piece to do because it really disabuses itself of the notion that the Martin Luther King that people have come to embrace, whether, earnestly or not, that dude didn't die in August of 63. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like people want to leave him at I have a dream and that's where he was. No. Martin Luther King effectively died like a radical who had no friends.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? It was the Washington Post who was after the Beyond Vietnam speech, it was he called him a disgrace, a discredit to his race and to the nation. Okay? The person who was murdered in April of 68, it's funny, assassinations it's murder. Somebody murdered that guy. And that person was fundamentally different in ways that I would argue are not different than, dude didn't die Malcolm X, he died El Hajj Malik El Shabazz.
Right.
And that person, in the questions they were asking, because they started asking questions about the money.
Yes.
They started asking questions about the money, and then you suddenly get shot. It's this is the weirdest thing.
Is that, and also one of the toll it was taking on the black community was.
We're talking about the Vietnam War?
The Vietnam War.
Yes, okay, I just wanted to.
Was one that he could no longer ignore. He just couldn't. But he had to be dragged to that place. He saw it happening, but he was like, how do I manage this? How do I walk this line? Well, it got to a point where you couldn't walk the line anymore. Sure. What it was doing to the black community, and I make the argument all the time, as a dramatist and as a student of history, that the most devastating thing that happened to the black community in the last 100 years was not the effects of post-slavery era, it was the Vietnam War. Because it so dismantled the black community in way that
I might make an argument for the war on drugs, but they're so closely connected in that it's.
But before you got to the war on drugs, you had to deal with the war on the black community.
Sure. Again, I'm just offering.
I found myself in a conversation on an airplane with Elliot Richardson, the Attorney General of the United States. I was on my way to the Million Man March, as a matter of fact.
As one does.
As one does. And I said, look at the generational impact of the Vietnam War.
Sure.
Imagine in 1956, when that escalation really kind of began. You were an 18-year-old black man, and you got sent to a place that nobody had ever heard of. You came back. There were no jobs. There was no GI Bill. You had been introduced to drugs in some ways. You had seen things that were just going to devastate you in the future. Well, you jump ahead 18 years. That young man is now probably in a dissolved marriage, has left a single mother, maybe in jail, maybe dead. But his kids are still alive. You jump ahead 18 more years, and the same thing is going to happen again. You jump ahead 18 more years. You've impacted 3 generations of people in less than 50 years. I mean, seriously impact, change the trajectory of their future. When I grew up in Michigan, I was born in 1953. I grew up in a community where everybody had a mom and a daddy at home. There was no single parent head of the household, women head of the household that I knew as the predominant reality. That predominant reality, as well as the war on drugs and the impact it had on the community, all go right back to the Vietnam War. And when King talked about it, he didn't just say, I'm mad about this. He said, let me tell you how we got here. And part of the message that Beyond Vietnam has for young people today is, you got to know how you got here.
Sure.
If you don't do the work and the research to understand how you got here, because just because you were born in 1995 doesn't mean that the world started there. It didn't. And King, in so much of his work, once you understand Letter from Birmingham Jail and Beyond Vietnam, you go back and look at his other work, and you go, wow, he was really pretty radical.
Yeah, and that his legacy has been co-opted for, at times, what I would almost call like nefarious purposes.
Yeah.
It's just one of those situations where it's like a lack of familiarity with the work, and I think that is again, that's both of those pieces, but particularly Beyond Vietnam, or just, I think it articulates him as a public figure, but then when you come to know about the things in his own personal life, his struggles, and I'm not just talking about like his marital struggles that people know about, but the mental health things, the physical condition of his body, and just,
his battles with depression.
Yeah. And I mean, there was a person here, that knew he was taking a risk, and then, that risk, clearly articulated itself a year later. And it's just, I always just feel like it's so important to kind of have that squared away. We're going to jump now to another little break before we get into our third and final segment of We, They, and the People, the character of King.
Thank you for watching this Mixed Magic Theater production. Please subscribe to our YouTube channel and turn on notifications so that you'll never miss any of our latest content. And thank you for believing in magic.
Welcome back to our final segment here of We, They, and the People, the character of King. And we wanted to save this last show, Fate Comes Knocking, for this segment because, you know, so often in these, when we talk about, you know, Martin Luther King and we talk about the civil rights movement, we have an unfortunate tendency to, you know, only play the hits, if you will, only talk about people like King or Ralph Abernathy or
Jesse Jackson,
things of that nature, right? All kinds of people, women, and other people who just maybe weren't names that you were going to see in the history books, but people who really were actually these foot soldiers, and they were actually the lifeblood of the movement because they were the people taking to the streets. They were the people sitting in. They were the people putting their lives at risk. And so we wanted to talk about the show Fate Comes Knocking, an original show written by you, Dad. And I am curious sort of what compelled you to go this route? Because, you know, the way Fate is set up, it's really like 5 friends who had experienced these events together, and not just as bystanders, but also as participants. And we sort of have, if you will, cutaways to, or sort of scenes where thematically the actors on stage will become these more famous persons to articulate certain parts of the history of the movement. But what compelled you to, why not just do a show about, like, well, here's Martin Luther King, the show's about him and what he was doing?
Well, I think the original motivation for writing Fate Comes Knocking was overhearing the conversation my parents had after going to see Martin Luther King's speech. They came home late and they had been to a rally and a speech for King. But then they all got together, all those black people, young black people, and they partied. They really celebrated each other. You know, you think about it, he was 25 years old. I mean, they were young people. We have a tendency to memorialize people at the moment of they die, as opposed to like, he was a young man, and you know, and Coretta was young, and they liked to party. They had to let off some of that steam.
Sure.
But I was so motivated by that energy of imagining King and Coretta and my mom and dad, you know, with a little 7-7 and some Bobby Blue Bland on, you know.
Sure.
So that was part of it. But then
can I cut in real quick because you got me thinking about something. So, bit tangential, but I think related. What did your parents' activism mean to you, not just at the time, but how does it inform your work as an artist? Because I think it all kind of ties into the universe of how Fate Comes Knocking comes to be. So just what did your parents' civic activism, how did it impact you, you know, at the time? How does it impact you as an artist and as a citizen?
I've often said that, you know, I inherited a disease from my dad, the disease of community activism. You know, I couldn't separate that history from the work I did as a theater artist. I grew up in a family where you were expected to participate in your own freedom, your own growth. You couldn't wait on somebody else to do it for you. You had to take to the street. You had to do it. So that was a part of it. So, but also, my parents in that generation especially had a view of the future. They were playing for the long game. They weren't just playing for temporary gains and small gains. They were playing for the long game. They were playing for better education, better opportunity, better housing, better things that were going to take a long time. They played for the long game.
Right.
So when writing Fate Comes Knocking, I was able to take a look at these 5 friends who gather one of them was about to get married. They've all come back to Atlanta, and they reflect on their growing up with Martin Luther King. That was important.
Sure.
He wasn't the iconic hero that he became. He was just he was just Martin.
Right.
And the nicknames they had for him, the little anecdotal stories they had about him. But also, you get a chance to see through their eyes how the long game was played.
I want to ask you a question, since we're hearing what you just said about your mom and dad. You know, I have to you talk about, you know, sort of playing for the long game. I have to wonder, you know, as a citizen, as an author, and as the son of your parents, what are we to make of insurrectionists like storming the U.S. Capitol building? You know, and sort of how do you see that against the backdrop of fate comes knocking, and you know, what does it mean? Because I often find myself sitting here thinking, and this is for me, for obviously my grandmother and her generation. It's like, man, they went through all that for this?
For this.
And so I find it quite dispiriting at times. So I'm just, if you could reflect a bit on that.
Well, one of the things that fate comes knocking, the people who are participating, getting ready for this wedding and reflecting on their lives and their history with each other and King. So it wasn't just about King; it was about all of them. It was about it was about being a foot soldier that they really discussed, but also their awareness that there was a bear behind the curtain. They were Black existence in America is a understanding that there's a bear behind the curtain, and it will devour you at any time. Now, we as Black people, we live our lives knowing there's a bear behind there, and we have learned ways to survive the bear, fight the bear off, you know,
run from the bear sometimes.
But there are people who believe there's no bear back there, or even worse, even if the curtain is pulled back, the bear won't eat them.
Sure.
Well, yes, it will.
Sure.
And the insurrection, on Wednesday, was evidence that you thought the bear wouldn't come for you. You know, yes, it will. You know, and the bear does not care about. The bear is only hungry. It will devour everything it touches. And, you know, but you see, balance with that, talk about the long haul, Stacey Abrams and Black voters in Philadelphia and Detroit and Minneapolis and all over the country stood up and said, I'm going to go vote as I have often done, not because I supported a candidate, I do this to honor my mother and father. And those civil rights workers, those foot soldiers who fought and died for my right to vote.
Sure.
But we exercise our right to vote and save the democracy. Because, as I talk about in Fate Comes Knocking, is Black people believe in the American dream more than any people have ever existed in this country. Because that's all we had sometimes. It was like, there's a hope. You know, we're not making stuff up. You wrote this, and we believe it. We believe it more than you believe it.
It's not really wanting something new. It's just like, just do the things that you said.
Just do it. Just be what you say. Be what you say you are. And that's the brilliance of the civil rights movement. It wasn't about an insurrection like happened in Washington. It was about saying, be what you say you are. We believe this. And they paid the price for it too. But the other side of it is, if the American ideal is a real thing, it was demonstrated last week also, because a Black man got elected from Georgia to the Senate. A Jew was elected from Georgia from the Senate. 7 million people, more people voted than in the last election. There's a video that I love. I play it back all the time, of dancers, of voters in Philadelphia waiting in line to vote. And somebody brings on a beatbox and starts playing a song, and the people just started dancing. The first time I saw it, I went home and said, Bernadette, we're gonna win. Because they did everything they could to keep us from voting.
Sure.
Suppress the vote, change the ballot boxes, move ballot boxes, close stations, just misinformation. But we rose above all of that to do it anyway and save the democracy. Well, King, if you look at his letter, he would tell you, look at his letters and his writing, over and over and over again, he was saying, if the American democracy is going to survive, it's going to be in part responsible. We're going to be partly responsible for its salvation.
Sure.
And the men and women who gather on this back porch in Georgia to get ready for this wedding, they really demonstrate that. They talk about that. We knew what we were doing when we and they paid the price too. One of the things that Fate Comes Knocking does also is it demonstrates the violent nature of this country.
Sure.
So many moments, great moments in history, particularly during the Civil Rights era, are marked by violence.
Sure.
I mean, the death of Emmett Till, Goodman, Cheney, and Schwerner, Viola Leoza.
The list goes on.
And
in a certain way, that list hasn't stopped. You know what I mean? You still have, it's, what is it? What is King? I'm paraphrasing. It's like, if you want a negative piece, which is just the absence of tension rather than the presence of justice.
That's
and
right.
I think that's so much about, why we do these shows. Because we are going to kind of wrap here. So I guess I'll leave you with the question of, with shows like Letter from Birmingham City Jail, Beyond Vietnam, Fate Comes Knocking, what is it that you as a theater artist and as a citizen, I don't know if I say like sort of either want people to take away from the shows or like, so now what? It's 2021. A lot of this work is based on events that are over 50 years in the past. Now what? How do we use it? What do you think is the sort of, how do we use it?
Well, Tom Griffin, an actor from Trinity and a writer, very fine, the late Tom Griffin, once told me the purpose of the theater is to tell people things they already know. And I have wrestled with that comment over the years, sometimes believing it very strongly, sometimes dismissing it outright. But in the case of African-American presence in history in this country, we do have to tell ourselves things that we already know. We just have to give them clarity and voice and energy. And the role of the theater is to take a moment in time and say, I'm going to show you the whole history of what happened, but I'm going to start with this moment in time. Because otherwise, you're talking about going to a history class, which is not what drama does. Scholarship is a history class. Drama, it takes scholarship and dramatizes it and makes it alive and understandable. But it also, when it does its job, it takes you back to the scholarship to say, well, what really did happen here?
Sure.
And I think the work that we do here is part and parcel of saying, I'm going to tell you something you already know, but there's a whole lot more to know.
I love that you said that, and I want to piggyback that comment as we wrap up here is, in a lot of ways, because I'm a teacher as well, I teach, and I'm a lover of history. I came by that honest. And it's true, a lot of it is like, go back and read the actual stuff. I'm actually just trying to spark that interest so you go and do that homework.
Do that homework.
Don't stop with our show.
Yeah.
Right? Don't stop with our shows. Right? Let our shows be a starting point, a conversation starter. And and do that work.
Do the work.
Because it's work that we all have to do. For the fate of the species, for the fate of the republic, and so it's necessary. It's time consuming, but it's necessary, and I would say it's gratifying. It's not always pretty. It can be pretty ugly in a great variety of respects, but the knowing always feels better to me. The knowing always feels better.
Knowing feels better, but also we have to be able to help, particularly Black and brown people, understand that don't separate your cause from the world. Don't think that it's just your cause, and if I can get a cup of soup and a piece of bread, I won't be hungry anymore.
Sure.
That's not enough. You can't separate the cause for peace and justice from climate change, from environmental destruction, from pollution, from the water in Flint, Michigan, from a pandemic, that has swept the world. You cannot separate yourself away from the events of the world, because then anybody can give you something and expect you to accept that as the totality of what your needs are. That's not the case.
Sure.
We have to be citizens more than ever. We have to be citizens of the world, because if nothing else, the insurrection on Wednesday on the Capitol building, people from around the world looked at us and said, "Oh, this is what you are?"
We have to make a choice about whether that's true or not.
Is that true or not? It's like that's not the country that I want to live in.
Powerful words from powerful people, and so we could keep going, but we're going to wrap it up here. Thank you so much for checking out this installment of We, They, and the People, the character of King. Again, my name is Jonathan Pitts-Wiley, the artistic director here at Mixed Magic. Thank you so much to Ricardo Pitts-Wiley, co-founder of Mixed Magic Theater. Thank you to everyone here who has taken the time to check out this episode. We are going to end, as we are wont to do, with an original song written by Ricardo Pitts-Wiley entitled "I Won't Give Up," from his original play, Kwanzaa Song, which we're going to see at the end of 2021.
Yes, we
fingers
are.
Crossed, fingers crossed.
And Fate Comes Knocking, we're going to do a version of that.
We are going to do a little bit of Fate in February, so be on the lookout for that as well. And until the next time, thank you, as always, for believing in magic.
I won't give up. I won't give up. I won't give up. I won't give up. Clouds rolling this morning, looking for a soul to claim. Clouds filling up the sky. I think I hear them calling my name. I won't give up. My mind on freedom, steady and staying. I won't give up. To my gods I'm praying. No more tears will I be crying. I got to live free, and I won't stop trying. And I won't give up. I won't give up. I won't give up. I won't